Good morning. It's great to see so many people here. We had some illnesses last week and we didn't have that many people here. My name is Carolyn Oselinek, and I want to welcome all of you to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Rappahannock. We are a fellowship that enthusiastically welcomes and embraces all equally. We're committed to providing a safe haven in difficult times. We're dedicated to exploring challenges we face as a society and taking action to address those challenges. We make common cause with all who want to make our world a better, fairer, healthier, and happier place. We honor each other and our planet and recognize that spirituality at its most meaningful requires that we put our beliefs into action. And we recognize that we are in a particularly difficult environment right now. And so we all need to stay together as community so that we can get through this. We are grateful to all of the members of the congregation who do the work necessary to sustain and grow our fellowship and make a real difference in the community and in the world. We're particularly delighted to hear today from the Reverend Kathering Gray, whose talk is titled, "When Love is Hard." I will tell you something about Katherine later in the service, but I do want to mention something right now. I talked with Kathy a couple of times this week about what she would be saying today and a little bit about her biography. And then on Friday, I called my doctor in Washington to make an appointment when I'm back. And the receptionist said, "Sure, hold on." And the next voice I heard was a woman who said, "Hello." And I said, "Hi, I wanted to make an appointment with Dr. Schwartz for my feet." And the woman said, "Well, I'm a hospice chaplain. I don't know that you need that yet." So I had been somehow rooted to Kathy. Coincidence? I don't think so. As we light this chalice, let's remember that the spark of love resides in us all. We are free to act on it or not. If we choose love, how will love shape what we do? If I choose love, will I find it when life gets hard? If I choose love, will you also choose love? Love begets love, and it is love that lights our chalice. Let us all choose love. Our opening words this morning are from Maureen Killoran. We are called today from the midst of pain and challenge. We are called to praise the world. From a world that appears broken, we are called to praise life's moments of joy and grace. From time that seems to freeze in ongoing exchanges of platitudes and blame, we are called to reach out to those around us, to connect with those we care about, to try to make amends with those from whom we are estranged. The world is too fragile. There is too much pain. Let us bring our hearts together on this day. Let us praise the mutilated world in all its blessing and its pain. And now I would like to tell you about the Reverend Kathering Tucker Gray. She was ordained to the Sacred Order of Deacons in 1998 in the Episcopal Church and has been a hospice chaplain for several healthcare systems. Prior to that, she was the Episcopal chaplain to VMI and Washington and Lee University, and chaplain at Stonewall Jackson Hospital and youth minister at R.E. Lee Episcopal Church in Lexington, Virginia. Kathy was born in Charleston, South Carolina, into a Navy family, and her formative years survived many moves and several cultures. I think she told me that she had been to 12 schools in 9 years or 9 schools in 12 years, but she still didn't know her multiplication tables. She calls Virginia home and was educated and trained through the School for Deacons at Duke University. She currently serves as St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Newport News. She has 3 adult children, 10 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. They live from Tidewater, Virginia to Western North Carolina. Something that is maybe a little known fact, certainly not part of her resume, is that she lived in Charleston, South Carolina in 1955 and 1956 with her grandmother. She was 9 years old, and when they got on a bus, Katherine headed toward the back of the bus, and her grandmother said, no, you can't sit in the back of the bus. And Kathy said, well, I want to sit in the back of the bus. Why can't I sit in the back of the bus? And her grandmother explained to her that the back of the bus was reserved for colored people. So that's not that long ago. And it's, in a sense, it's really heartbreaking to realize that, and then also to realize how far back we've gone. And now I give you Reverend Kathering Gray, and the subject of her talk is When Love is Hard.
Thank you. And how are your feet?
I need to do that, Don.
The last part of that story was we had just come back from 2 years on Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands. And when my grandmother was explaining segregation to me, I said, but Granny, we were invited to sit on the same mat as the king of Ibu Island. And that was an honor. And she did a Jesus My Beads thing that... Anyway, I'm delighted to be here with you today. As I was driving up here this morning, I remembered the only other time I've been asked to preach here, and it was in 1999. You were still at the Women's Club, and I was on my way to Lexington in a U-Haul, I think. And it's been a long time since I've been invited back, so I would like to ask you at this time, was it something I said? This is a reading from the 6th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. Words given to us by the first Unitarian Universalist, Jesus. Jesus said, I say to you who will listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to anyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies, do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and to the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. So, the former Bishop of New Hampshire, the Right Reverend Gene Robinson, was a very controversial choice in the year 2003, as he was an out gay man when elected by his diocese by people who knew him, who loved him, and who trusted him. And his election was protested throughout the church. And that was a year of a general convention. And during that convention, when he was to be voted on by the entire Episcopal Church, or the foreign and domestic church of whatever we are, one of the other dioceses, or a group of people who really questioned the choice of him, spread salt all around his diocese's information table in order to purify the misguided people who had elected him. And so great was the protest that he was required to wear a bulletproof vest at his consecration. His courage, his integrity, and his faith had been both a model and a gift to the church and the world beyond the church. In a sermon that he delivered at All Saints Church in Pasadena in 2016, Bishop Robinson remarked, "It's funny, isn't it? You can preach a judgmental, vengeful, and angry God, and nobody will mind. But if you start preaching about a God that is too accepting, too loving, too forgiving, too merciful, and too kind, you are in big trouble." The fella quoted in the gospel, Jesus, knew this. Dr. Martin Luther King knew this. And Bishop Marion Buddy experienced this just 2 months ago as she gently spoke to power, seeking mercy for marginalized people who are terrified. Just 2 months ago in the National Cathedral, as people of all faiths gathered to pray for the country, to pray for the new administration and the new leadership, she has received death threats since, and also thousands upon thousands of thank you notes. It was suggested that she be deported, this gentle woman who made a plea for mercy to people being threatened and terrified and who are not reassured as time goes by in this new time of loss and change. And I know from long experience, as both as an observer and as an occasional target, that those who proclaim God's scandalous, unconditional, generous love for saints and sinners alike are frequently criticized and suffer the slings and arrows of a rage that is beyond me to understand. I think that's a good thing, that I don't understand it. But what Jesus tells the people who would listen, gathered on the plain from the reading in Luke, but what Jesus tells the people who were gathered, when repeated or when preached or even when lived out, has ruffled feathers for centuries. The scripture we just heard, which has echoes in all the major religions of the world, suggests that possibly a good number of people bailed on Jesus, walked out, because he had just delivered not only the Beatitudes, but the woes. And perhaps the offended left hurriedly. He was now talking to those who would listen. An interesting aside is that the 12 disciples who were chosen that day from the remnants of the people remaining who had come to hear him. The universal charge to love, particularly those who hate, abuse, cheat, mock, deride, betray, diminish, exclude, and hurt us, is the greatest challenge we have as people of faith. Yet it is what differentiates us for even trying. And sometimes the very best of us thinks or says aloud, but surely that doesn't apply to all, to everyone. Because it's hard. It's really hard to love both victim and offender. But what this text delivers is a way of being in this world that centers on being loving, on being forgiving, generous, and merciful, qualities that are countercultural in the world in which we find ourselves in the year of our Lord 2025. In fact, they're mocked. A way paved by being aware, being present, being able to really see and hear and care for and about those on the margins, whether they're there by origin, of accident of birth, or country of birth, or behavior. How can we view these people with empathy? Power, wealth, and the ability to dominate by might and by force and fear are being normalized in these days, as evidenced by the recent changes in who takes precedence, who is honored, who is more valued in a country peopled ironically by the descendants of invasion, colonization, slavery, and vast immigration leading to the changing demographics. We used to be so proud of being a melting pot, a nation of immigrants seeking a better life. Despite the initial barriers facing those groups who were other than Anglo-Saxon Christians. And that's still not a pretty thing. We need to work on that, or they're going to take the Statue of Liberty away from us. We are told to meet violence with passivity and nonviolence, and to react to theft with generosity. In all of the offenses listed in the reading, we are to continue to treat the offenders as we would wish to be treated ourselves. So we add civility and respect to empathy. Jesus was not the first to suggest this aspect of enlightened humanity, a moral and ethical way of life. It's ancient, dating back to the Babylonians, the Egyptians, even before the beginning of the Jewish faith, as Abraham was called to father a new nation whose descendants would outnumber the stars. Hindu and Buddhist have the same high standard laid upon them. Indeed, the foundation of all faith is said to be acting with loving kindness. I read this and I wonder how to step out from the unearned, unmerited privilege that has insulated me throughout a lifetime, and embrace this way of being in all that I do and in all that I hope to become, all that I'm called to become. In this frightening time of polarization and division, we're honoring our diversity and seeking our equality and everyone else's, and embracing inclusion are no longer sanctioned values. I am painfully aware of the limitations, not only on me, but on so many others, and so much more, as we struggle to remain in the mainstream of our country. So how do we respond to the current violations of this ethic, this moral code, this corruption of our Constitution, and the dismantling of our democracy? There's a paradigm for this in the Jewish tradition, which harkens back to Adam's dysfunctional family being questioned before God, who created them out of the dust. 4 questions, and I have begun to ask myself these 4 questions when faced with a conundrum that I cannot see beyond. And they're taken in this form from an article by the Rabbi Zach Shapiro, who put them in this context to guide his youth group through a lobbying excursion in our nation's capital. The questions are those from the Talmud. The first being, God asked Adam, after he ate the fruit of the Garden of Eden, "Where are you?" And of course, God knew where he was. But the question for all of us, for each of us, is where am I in my life? Where is our country right now? The second question, and this is what God asked Cain after he murders his brother Abel, where is your brother? And we need to ask ourselves the extent to which we care for our family members, our friends, our neighbors, and especially in our ability to embrace the stranger. Cain, as he tries to dodge the question, responds to God, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And again, to what extent or how far can we go or must we go for our community, for our country? And the fourth question fast forwards to Moses, when God tells him to go before Pharaoh. And maybe God told Bishop Bundy to go before Trump. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I to go before power? And the question for us is, does my voice, do our voices really matter? And the rabbi further states that whether we are lobbying to make changes in our country or trying to better understand our reasons for existing on this earth, these four questions are central to our finding meaning in our lives. And I'm thinking of all the brave things I have seen in my life by groups of people who were considered powerless, on a chart, the Mother's March that ended the war in Vietnam. But the first time I witnessed a nonviolent protest was in the early 60s, when the streets were full of young and old Black people walking silently, holding hands, or sitting at lunch counters to protest the oppressive barriers to a full life in this country. Segregation in the schools, on buses, lunch counters, businesses, when you couldn't go in the front door. That's why the Sears catalog came into being, was that Black people were not allowed in stores to buy things. That was the beginning of the Sears catalog. Housing, the inability to cast votes as citizens of the United States in some parts of this country. But what I remember most about that is their dignity and restraint. When the dogs were set loose, when the fire hydrants were used to intimidate, frighten, and stop them. And the only violence in those protests came from the police and the Klan. Their behavior was very much, behavior of these marchers who were protesting something was so much in contrast to what we all saw on January 6, 2020, when there was a protest, but it was violent. And it was a coup to stop the certification of the election that took place in our nation's capital. But going back to the civil rights movement, many churches in this country supported them. And many hymns were sung as they were hauled off to jail. The college chaplains in the South from white schools were very present in that cause, which was one reason why chaplaincy ended up being defunded in the South for many years. It's true, there was a resurgence, in the 80s and 90s. But I don't think we heard anything during that time about the separation of church and state. Does anybody remember when the churches were supporting integration, if there was much discussion?
I think there was a lot of discussion about it. I remember people talking about when Kennedy JFK was running and the preachers.
Oh, they thought the whole, the Pope is going to rule.
Preacher at our Episcopal church for preaching that kind of sermon. She said that was
Oh,
they're talking like that. But
they write letters to the vestry about me. Okay. See, I don't remember hearing that during civil rights. I do remember as time went on, it became more and more and more of an issue. I think we hear a lot about the separation of church and state these days. We tried to have one of the state senators come to St. Andrews and talk about education on Education Sunday, not realizing when we asked him in May that there would be an election in November, and this was the end of October. And there was umbrage that he would be, well, he was a Democrat, and he was John Miller, who was wonderful. And one of the people in our, well, anyway, it was not pretty. But what I want to say about that, Bishop Buddy was preaching a homily in a cathedral where she had authority. And all those political people were guests. And I have to think that the whole issue of our silence as people of faith has been purchased by a tax-exempt status. I think we have been silenced because that's the fear. And I think it's worth exchanging for the ability to speak out and show up. Because all of history, I mean, how many people from various religions have felt the need to go and advocate for something or ask for something in Caesar's court? That's our job. Our job is to be the nerve endings and the conscience. And I'm all for getting rid of tax exempts. I will pledge more. But it's costing our brothers and sisters on the margins. It's costing our military being fleeced of all female and people of color in leadership. Do you know that in this past week, the names at Arlington National Cemetery of women, Hispanics, and Blacks have been taken off the rolls? I am so angry about that. Arlington National Cemetery is probably the most diverse piece of property in this entire country. I think something like 136 spiritual paths are denoted on tombstones. They even have a Confederate section, you know, but those people did fight in the Spanish-American War. It wasn't total amnesty. But our veterans and civil servants are being fired and stripped of their benefits and health care. And all of the egregious appointments of unqualified people being given the power to take down every safety net we have, as well as the ongoing, what used to be the autonomy to make our own health care decisions for women. The prophet Micah, when asked what the Lord required of us, said, "Love mercy, do justice,